Welcome to Divine Peace. Tonight we'll read through the ancient Book of Lamentations to help you slow down, settle your thoughts, and drift into peaceful sleep. There will be no ads while you listen. If this channel brings you rest, consider subscribing and let us know in the comments where in the world you're listening from tonight. Now settle in, close your eyes, and let's begin. There is a certain hour of the night when the house has finally gone quiet. The last light has been turned off. The day has spent itself. And in that hush, some of us find that the sorrow we managed to hold at arm's length all day now sits down beside us in the dark. If that is you tonight, you're welcome here. You do not need to explain it. You do not need to fix it, or name it, or make it smaller than it is. Tonight, we're simply going to sit with an old and gentle book and let it carry the weight for a while. It is a book written for people exactly like us. People who lay down at night with something heavy pressed against the heart. Far away and very long ago, there was a city. It stood on a ridge of pale limestone hills, its stone walls catching the gold of evening and the blue of morning. It had gates that opened at dawn. It had streets where merchants called out their prices, where children ran, where women drew water and carried it home balanced on their shoulders. It had a temple at its highest point, a house of worship whose courts filled with singing on the festival days. Pilgrims came up the roads toward it, chanting as they climbed. It was a city that knew how to sing. And then there came a year when the singing stopped. The walls that had stood for generations were broken. The gates that opened each morning lay in ruins. The temple that crowned the hill was burned, its stones blackened, its songs silenced. And the people who had filled those streets were gone, marched away in long lines toward a distant land, leaving behind them empty houses and empty roads, and the terrible quiet that settles over a place after everything has been taken from it. That city was Jerusalem, and out of its ashes came a scroll, a small collection of 5 poems written by someone who had seen it fall, who had walked among the ruins while they were still warm, who could not turn the sorrow into anything neat or triumphant, and so simply wrote it down. We call that scroll Lamentations. It is one of the oldest recorded cries of grief in the world, and for more than 2,500 years people have opened it precisely at moments like this one, in the dark, when the day is done. When there is nothing left to do but feel what is true. You may wonder why a book of mourning belongs on a channel meant to help you sleep. Here is why. Lamentations does not pretend. It does not tell the grieving to cheer up. It does not rush past the pain to reach the lesson. It sits with the loss, patiently, honestly, verse after verse, and in doing so it gives sorrow a kind of dignity. It says, in effect, that what you feel is allowed to be felt, that mourning is not weakness, that there is a place for tears and a language for them, and that language is very old. And yet the book does not leave us in the dark forever. Somewhere in its very centre, in its 3rd poem, after page upon page of anguish, the voice lifts, just for a moment, and speaks words that people have clung to ever since. Words about a love that does not run out, about compassions that never fail, about mercies that are, the book says, new every morning. We will get there, gently, in time. But we will not rush to it, because the book itself does not rush. Tonight, we honour the whole journey, the weeping and the waiting and the small stubborn hope that survives them both. So this is the quiet promise I want to make to you at the edge of this night. We will not hurry. We will let each line have its own space to breathe. We will move slowly through the ruins, the way you would walk slowly through a place you had loved and lost. And when we reach the morning that this book promises, you will, I hope, already be asleep, carried there by the sound of words that have comforted the sorrowful for a very long time. You do not have to stay awake to hear the ending. The ending will keep. For now, just breathe. Let your shoulders drop. Let the day slip off of you like a coat you no longer need to wear, and let the old poems begin to do what they were written to do. Before we open the scroll itself, let us sit for a moment with the story of how it came to be, and with the man whose name has been joined to it for thousands of years. He is remembered as the weeping prophet. His name was Jeremiah. He was born into a priestly family in a small village called Anathoth, only about 3 miles from Jerusalem, near enough that he could likely see the city's walls from the hills near his home. He grew up in the shadow of that great city, and he would spend his life speaking to it and grieving over it. Tradition tells us that Jeremiah served as a prophet for around 40 years. 40 years is a long time to carry a message that almost no one wants to hear. He began his work in the days of a good king named Josiah, and he continued through the reigns of Judah's last 4 kings, Jehoahaz, Jehoiakim, Jehoiakim, and Zedekiah. 4 kings, one after another, as the little kingdom of Judah slid closer and closer to the edge. For more than 40 years, Jeremiah warned of a judgment that was coming. He pleaded with the people to change their course, to turn back, to repent. He warned them that the great empire rising in the east, Babylon, would one day come down upon them if they did not change. And virtually no one listened. His warnings were ignored. His words were dismissed. We can imagine what those years must have cost him. To love a city, to see the danger it was walking toward, and to be unable to make anyone hear you. To be treated as a nuisance, a doomsayer, a man who could not stop speaking of sorrow. That is why he is called the weeping prophet. Not because he was weak, but because he saw clearly and could not stop caring. And when the judgment he had foretold finally came, when the walls did fall and the temple did burn and the people were led away, there was no comfort in having been right. There was only grief. Tradition has held that it was Jeremiah who then took up his pen and wrote these 5 poems of mourning over the fallen city. Now, it is worth saying honestly that scholars are divided about this. Many today believe that Jeremiah did not write Lamentations himself, and that the true author, or perhaps authors, remain anonymous, lost to us across the centuries. The name of Jeremiah was attached to the book long ago, out of a natural impulse to connect these grieving poems to the prophet who had grieved so long over the same city. We may never know for certain whose hand held the pen, but this much is true. Whoever wrote these words had seen the ruin with their own eyes. The grief in them is not borrowed. It is not imagined. It is the grief of someone who walked the broken streets while the smoke still hung in the air. And there is something in the very shape of these poems that speaks of a mind trying to hold sorrow together, to give it structure so that it would not simply spill out and drown everything. Because the poems of Lamentations are built in a remarkable way. They are acrostics. To understand what that means, picture the Hebrew alphabet, which has 22 letters, running from the first letter, Aleph, to the last letter, Tav. The way we might say, in English, that something runs from A to Z. In the first poem, there are 22 verses, and the first verse begins with the first letter of the alphabet. The second verse begins with the second letter. The third with the third. On and on, letter by letter, all the way through to the 22nd. The whole alphabet laid out in order. The second poem does the same. 22 verses marching through the alphabet from beginning to end. The fourth poem does the same again. And the third poem, the one at the very heart of the book, takes it even further. It has 66 verses. 3 verses for each letter of the alphabet. 3 lines beginning with the first letter, then 3 with the second, then 3 with the third, all the way to the end. Only the 5th and final poem breaks this pattern. It is not an acrostic, and yet even it holds to 22 lines, as if it cannot fully let go of the shape, as if the number itself has become a kind of comfort. Why would someone do this? Why would a person in the depths of mourning take such care to arrange their grief so precisely, from the first letter to the last. Scholars have long thought that this complete alphabetical order, from Aleph to Tav, expresses a principle of completeness, the sense that everything has been said, that grief has been spelled out in full, that nothing has been held back and nothing has been left out. There is something deeply human in this. When we are overwhelmed, we reach for order. We make lists. We put things in their places. We find a rhythm and we hold to it, because the rhythm keeps us from coming apart. And that is exactly what these poems do. They give sorrow a container. They spell out the pain, one letter at a time, until the whole alphabet of grief has been named and the poem can finally come to rest. The rhythm of the lines themselves has a name too. It is called china, which simply means lament. In this rhythm, each line typically has 3 beats, followed by 2, a longer stress, and then a shorter one. Some who have studied it have described it as the sound of a limp, a step, and then a shorter, faltering step. The very metre of the poems moves like someone walking wounded, 3 beats, and then 2, a cadence that falls and falls again, the way grief itself does. So even in the way these poems sound when they're read aloud, before you understand a single word there is mourning built into their bones, and these poems have been read aloud in exactly this spirit for a very, very long time. Among the Jewish people, Lamentations is read each year on a solemn day of fasting and mourning. It is called the 9th of Abianan, Tisha B'Av, a day set aside to remember the destruction of Jerusalem and its temple. And on that day, for well over 2,000 years, these laments have been chanted softly in synagogues, in a mournful tune passed down across the generations. Think of that. The same words we're about to read tonight have been read aloud, in sorrow, by countless people across more than 20 centuries. Mourners in ancient times, mourners in the Middle Ages, mourners in every century since. An unbroken chain of grieving voices, each one taking up this old alphabet of sorrow and carrying it a little further down the years. Tonight you join that chain. You take your place among all those who have opened this book in the dark and found in it a companion for their own quiet ache. You're not the first to carry sorrow into the night, and you are not alone in it. To feel the full weight of these poems, it helps to understand the wound from which they bleed. Because Lamentations is not mourning something small, it is mourning the end of a world. Let us go back then to the events themselves, to the year the walls came down. The great power of that age was Babylon, an empire to the east, and its king was Nebuchadnezzar II, a ruler whose name still echoes across the ages. His armies were vast and disciplined, and his ambition reached far beyond his own borders. The little kingdom of Judah, with its capital at Jerusalem, lay in the path of that ambition. This was not the first time Babylon had come. Some years earlier, in an first siege, Nebuchadnezzar had already pressed against the city and pillaged it. He had taken away some of its wealth and some of its people, and he had placed on the throne a king of his own choosing. A puppet king named Zedekiah, set there to keep Judah obedient and quiet. But Zedekiah did not stay obedient. In time, he launched a revolt against his Babylonian masters, and an empire like Babylon does not forgive a revolt. So the army returned. This time it came to finish what it had started. This siege that followed was long and terrible. Accounts tell us it lasted somewhere between 18 months and 30 months. Picture that. A year and a half, 2 years, perhaps longer. An army camped around the city, cutting it off from the world. A siege in the ancient world was not a single dramatic battle. It was a slow strangling. The Babylonians did not need to storm the walls at first. They only needed to wait. They cut off the supplies of food coming into the city. They surrounded it, and they waited, playing a patient and merciless game. And inside the walls the food began to run out. We are told the city started to starve after about 2 years of this. Try to imagine what that means, not as a fact, but as a lived reality. The market stalls empty, the storehouses scraped bare, families dividing smaller and smaller portions, the strong growing weak, the weak growing weaker still, children who no longer had the energy to cry, the elderly fading in the doorways, hunger settling over the whole city like a fog that would not lift. This is the famine that haunts the poems we're about to read. When Lamentations speaks of tongues sticking to the roofs of mouths, of children fainting in the streets, of the unspeakable things that desperation drives people to do, it is not exaggeration. It is memory. It is the record of what those long months of starvation actually did to a trapped and dying city. And then, at last, the waiting ended. The Babylonian forces breached the walls. The stones that had protected the city for so long were broken open, and the soldiers poured in. What followed was systematic destruction. This was not random looting. It was deliberate, thorough, intended to erase Jerusalem as a place of power and meaning forever. The city walls were demolished, not merely damaged, but torn down. The buildings inside the city were set on fire, house after house, street after street, and at the summit of the city stood the temple, the house of worship built long before by Solomon, the great centre of the nation's faith, the place they believed God himself had chosen to dwell. The Babylonians razed it. They burned it to the ground, the most sacred place in all the land, the heart of everything, reduced to blackened rubble and rising smoke. We do not have to imagine the physical evidence of this, because the earth itself remembers it. Archaeologists digging in the old city have found the traces of that day, layers of ash. Burnt wooden beams collapsed among the stones of ruined buildings, the scorched remains of a city that burned. These silent blackened layers in the ground confirm the ancient dating of the catastrophe, placing it around the year 586 before the Common Era. Scholars still debate the precise year. Some place it at 586, others at 587, weighing the ancient records against one another. But whether it was 586 or 587, the reality beneath the debate is the same. A city fell, a temple burned, a world ended, and the fate of the king reveals just how complete the ruin was. King Zedekiah, the one who had revolted, tried to flee. He slipped out of the dying city and made his way toward Jericho, hoping perhaps to escape into the wilderness beyond. But he was captured. He was brought before Nebuchadnezzar at a place called Riblah, and there a terrible sentence was carried out. His sons were executed before his eyes. The last thing King Zedekiah ever saw was the death of his children. For then, immediately after, he was blinded, and blind, and childless, and defeated, he was led away in chains to Babylon, to end his days a prisoner in the land of his conquerors. And he was not alone in that long march east. A large portion of the city's people were taken into exile in Babylonia, torn from their homes, torn from the graves of their ancestors, marched across hundreds of miles of road to live as captives in a foreign land, by the rivers of Babylon, in a place whose language they did not speak, and whose gods were not their own. Behind them they left a ruin. Let yourself see it, gently, for a moment, before we turn to the words. The great walls broken into heaps of pale stone, the gates that once opened at dawn now lying charred and useless in the dust, The streets where merchants had called out and children had run, now silent, littered with ash and debris. The temple, the crown of the whole city, a smoking ruin on the hilltop. The houses standing empty, their doors hanging open, their hearths cold. And over all of it, that particular silence that comes only after everything has been taken. Not a restful silence, a hollow one. The silence of a place that used to be full of voices and now has none. This is the wound. This is the loss from which every verse of Lamentations bleeds. When the poems speak of a city sitting alone, of roads that mourn because no one comes to the festivals, of gates lying desolate, they are not speaking in metaphor alone. They are speaking of these very streets, these very walls, this very ruin that the writer had seen with waking eyes. And so the Book of Lamentations became something precious to the people who had lost everything. It became a memorial to the pain and the confusion that followed the destruction. Because there was confusion alongside the pain. These were people who had believed their city was protected, who had believed the temple could not fall, who had trusted that they were safe. And now everything they had trusted lay in ashes, and they did not understand. The poems do not offer easy answers to that confusion. They do not tie the loss up neatly. They simply hold it. They give us words. They let the grief and the bewilderment stand side by side, unresolved, honest, human. And that perhaps is why the book has comforted the sorrowful for so long. Because most grief is like that. It does not come with answers. It comes with questions we cannot resolve, and a pain we did not choose, and a longing for a world that will not come back. Lamentations does not shame us for feeling any of that. It simply sits down beside us in the ruins, and it begins, very quietly, to speak. The poems will describe a city imagined as a woman, a widow sitting alone. Once she was great among the nations, a queen among the provinces. Now she sits in the dust with no one to comfort her, weeping in the night, her tears wet upon her cheeks. There is no one to wipe them away. Her friends have betrayed her. Her lovers have abandoned her. Her children have gone into captivity. And she sits alone in the silence of the fallen city, and she weeps. That is where the first poem begins, with a widow and her tears and the emptiness of a place that once was full. We will go there slowly in a little while. For now, let it be enough to know where we're going, into a book of honest sorrow, written by someone who had seen a world end, and who could not and would not pretend otherwise. But remember the promise held in the heart of it. For all its weeping, this book does not stay in the dark forever. Deep in its third poem, after the widow's tears and the burning temple and the long march into exile, a single voice rises up out of the ruin and dares to say something almost unbelievable. That because of a great love, the people are not completely consumed. That there are compassions that never fail. That these mercies are new every morning, and that great is the faithfulness that renews them. That is where we are bound in the end, toward the morning. But we'll get there the way the book gets there, slowly, honestly, through the whole long night of grief, so that when the morning comes we will have earned it, and it will mean what it truly means. For now there is no hurry. There is only this quiet room, and your breathing, and the old words waiting to be read. Let the weight you carried into this night rest here for a while. You do not have to hold it alone. An old and gentle book will help you hold it, and a very old promise waits for you at the far end of the dark. So breathe and let go, and let us begin to walk slowly into the ruins of a city that once knew how to sing. Let us begin to listen to the voice that gave its grief a shape, one letter at a time from the beginning of the alphabet to the end, and let us trust, as so many have trusted before us, that the morning this book promises is real, that mercies do come new with the dawn, that the night, however long, does not have the final word. Settle in now, close your eyes, and let the words begin. The Book of Lamentations. Chapter 1. How lonely sits the city that was full of people. Let those words settle a moment before we go on. How lonely sits the city that was full of people. Hear the emptiness in it. A place that once held crowds. A place where markets rang out, where footsteps filled the streets from dawn until dark, where voices climbed the stone stairways and children ran in the courts. And now, silence. Now, a city sitting alone. The word the poet chose is the word for one left behind, for one who remains when everyone else has gone. How lonely sits the city that was full of people. How like a widow has she become. She who was great among the nations, she who was a princess among the provinces has become a slave. Hear how the poem does not describe stones and walls, though the stones and walls are broken. It describes a woman. The city becomes a woman, and she is a widow now. Once she was a bride. Once she was great among the nations, honoured, envied, spoken of in far places. She was a princess among the provinces, and now she is a slave. The one who commanded is made to serve. The one who was clothed in fine things sits in the dust. She weeps bitterly in the night, with tears on her cheeks. Among all her lovers she has no one to comfort her. All her friends have dealt treacherously with her. They have become her enemies. She weeps bitterly in the night, not in the day when the world is busy, when there is work to do and faces to keep composed, but in the night, in the long dark hours when the house is still and there is no one to see. That is when the weeping comes, tears on her cheeks, and no one to comfort her. That is the wound at the centre of this first poem. Not only that she is lost, but that she is alone in the losing. Among all her lovers she has no one to comfort her. The friends who once flattered her, the nations who once courted her favour, the allies she once trusted, they have all turned away. They have dealt treacherously. They have become her enemies. She sits alone with her grief, and no hand reaches out to wipe the tears from her face. Judah has gone into exile because of affliction and harsh labour. She dwells now among the nations. She finds no resting place. All who pursue her have overtaken her in the midst of her distress. Hear that. She finds no resting place. The people carried away from their homeland are wandering now among strangers. There is no bed that is theirs, no hearth that is theirs, no corner of the earth where they can lie down and say, "This is home," and rest. They have been driven and overtaken, and they find no resting place. The roads to Zion mourn, for no one comes to her appointed festivals. All her gates are desolate. Her priests groan, her young women grieve, and she is in bitter anguish. Listen to that image. The roads to Zion mourn. The very roads, because no one walks them now. There were times, 3 times each year, when those roads would fill with travellers, pilgrims coming up to the great festivals, families with their children, their bundles, their offerings, singing as they climbed toward the city on the hill. The roads knew the sound of that singing. They knew the tramp of pilgrim feet, the laughter, the songs of ascent that the travellers sang as the temple came into view. And now the roads are empty. No one comes to the appointed festivals. The gates that once could hardly hold the crowd stand desolate. The priests who once moved through the courts in their duties now groan. The young women grieve, and the city herself is in bitter anguish. Her foes have become her masters. Her enemies are at ease. The Lord has brought her grief because of her many sins. Her children have gone away, captives before the foe. Her children have gone away. There is the deepest cut of all for the widow. Not only her walls broken, not only her festivals silenced, but her children taken, led away as captives before the enemy. The young ones, the future, the ones she would have watched grow, marched off into a far country, and she cannot follow. She can only sit and remember their faces. All the splendour has departed from the daughter of Zion. Her princes are like deer that find no pasture. In weakness they have fled before the pursuer. All the splendour has departed. Everything that made her beautiful, Everything that made her proud has been stripped away. Her leaders, once strong, are like deer that find no pasture, starving, weak, fleeing before the one who hunts them. There is no strength left in them, and no dignity, only the desperate running of the hunted. In the days of her affliction and wandering, Jerusalem remembers all the treasures that were hers in days of old. When her people fell into enemy hands, there was no one to help her. Her enemies looked at her and laughed at her destruction. Here the poem shows us how grief works. In the days of her affliction she remembers. She remembers the treasures that were hers in the days of old. That is what the grieving mind does in the night. It remembers what was. It runs its fingers over the memory of better days, the fullness, the abundance, the safety, and the remembering only sharpens the pain of what is now. For when the memory fades and she opens her eyes, there is no help. There is no one to reach for, and there are enemies who look on her ruin and laugh. Jerusalem has sinned greatly, and so she has become unclean. All who honoured her despise her, for they have seen her nakedness. She herself groans and turns away. Here is something we should notice, and notice gently, because the poem does not spare itself. Jerusalem does not claim she is innocent. The poem lets her confess. She has sinned greatly. Whatever else has happened, whatever the injustice of the invaders, the poet does not pretend the city was blameless. There is honesty here, even about her own part in her downfall, and there is shame in it. The shame of one who once was honoured and now is exposed. All who honoured her despise her. They have seen her nakedness. She herself groans and turns away. She cannot bear to be looked at. Her filthiness clung to her skirts. She did not consider her future. Her fall was astounding. There was none to comfort her. Look, O Lord, on my affliction, for the enemy has triumphed. Again that phrase returns like a refrain through the whole poem. There was none to comfort her. You will hear it more than once in this first chapter, and each time it lands a little heavier. There was none to comfort her. It is the loneliest line in the book, not the fact of loss, but the absence of any hand to hold in the losing. And then, for the first time, the widow herself begins to speak. Until now the poet has described her from outside. Now she raises her own voice. Look, O Lord, on my affliction. She turns in her sorrow to the only one left to turn to. The enemy has laid hands on all her treasures. She saw pagan nations enter her sanctuary, those you had forbidden to enter your assembly. The very holy place, the sanctuary, has been entered by strangers. The place set apart, guarded, sacred, has been trampled by foreign feet. All her people groan as they search for bread. They barter their treasures for food to keep themselves alive. Look, O Lord, and consider, for I am despised. Here is the famine we have spoken of, made human. All her people groan as they search for bread. The great siege had squeezed the city until there was nothing left to eat. The people who once feasted now barter their treasures for a mouthful of food. The gold, the fine things, the heirlooms of generations, traded away for a piece of bread. Anything to keep themselves alive one more day. And still the widow turns to God. Look, O Lord, and consider. Now comes the line that has echoed down the centuries. The line that reaches out from the page and touches everyone who has ever grieved. Is it nothing to you, all you who pass by? Look around and see. Is any suffering like my suffering that was inflicted on me, that the Lord brought on me in the day of his fierce anger? Is it nothing to you, all you who pass by? Imagine the widow at the roadside, the travellers going by on the road, on their way to their own affairs, their own homes, their own untouched lives. And she calls out to them, not for money, not for rescue, just to be seen. Is it nothing to you, all you who pass by? Look around and see. She does not ask them to fix anything. She knows they cannot fix it. She asks only that they not walk past as if nothing had happened, that they turn their heads and look and see that her suffering is real. That is often all the grieving ask of the world, not solutions. Just the dignity of being witnessed, Do not look away. Do not hurry past. Look around and see. Is any suffering like my suffering? And perhaps, if you are lying awake tonight with a sorrow of your own, that is what this old book offers you. Not an answer, not a fix, just the sense that someone long ago put your feeling into words, that your grief has a shape, and the shape has already been spoken. You're not the first to sit alone in the night and ask to be seen. The widow of Zion asked it first. Is it nothing to you? Look and see. From on high he sent fire, sent it down into my bones. He spread a net for my feet and turned me back. He made me desolate, faint all the day long. She goes on, and her words grow heavier. Fire in the bones, a net spread for the feet. The sense of being caught, turned back, unable to escape. Desolate, faint all the day long. That weariness that grief brings, that heaviness in the limbs when sorrow has drained the strength from the body. Faint all the day long. My sins have been bound into a yoke. By his hands they were woven together. They have been hung on my neck, and the Lord has sapped my strength. The images of a burden laced together and laid across the shoulders, a yoke of sorrow, woven from her own failings, hung on her neck, and under it, her strength gives way. The Lord has handed me over to those I cannot withstand. The Lord has rejected all the warriors in my midst. He has summoned an army against me to crush my young men. In his winepress the Lord has trampled the virgin daughter of Judah, trampled in the winepress. It is a terrible image, and the poem does not soften it. The young men crushed like grapes underfoot, the strong warriors rejected, unable to stand. This is for these things I weep. My eyes overflow with tears. No one is near to comfort me, no one to restore my spirit. My children are destitute because the enemy has prevailed, and there it is again, that refrain that will not leave her. No one is near to comfort me, no one to restore my spirit. 3 times now this poem has told us that the widow has no comforter. It is the wound the poem keeps returning to, the way a grieving heart keeps returning to the same ache. This is for these things I weep. My eyes overflow with tears. Zion stretches out her hands, but there is no one to comfort her. The Lord has decreed for Jacob that his neighbours become his foes. Jerusalem has become an unclean thing among them. Zion stretches out her hands, reaching for someone, anyone to take hold of her, and finding no one there. The Lord is righteous, yet I rebelled against his command. Listen, all you peoples, look on my suffering. My young men and young women have gone into exile. The widow does not curse. Even in her deepest sorrow she says the Lord is righteous. She holds the ache and the honesty together. She admits she rebelled, and still she cries out to be heard. Listen, all you peoples, look on my suffering. I called to my allies, but they betrayed me. My priests and my elders perished in the city while they searched for food to keep themselves alive. Even the priests, even the elders, the wise and the holy, died searching for something to eat. The famine did not spare the honoured. See, O Lord, how distressed I am. I am in torment within, and in my heart I am disturbed, for I have been most rebellious. Outside the sword bereaves. Inside there is only death. Outside the sword, inside the plague and the hunger. There is no safe place. To go out is to meet the sword. To stay in is to meet the slow death of famine. The whole city has become a trap with no exit. People have heard my groaning, but there is no one to comfort me. All my enemies have heard of my distress. They rejoice at what you have done. May you bring the day you have announced, so they may become like me. Even now, in her lowest place, the widow does not ask for the destruction of her enemies out of cruelty. She asks only that the same measure of justice reach them too. that they should understand what she has understood. Let all their wickedness come before you. Deal with them as you have dealt with me because of all my sins. My groans are many, and my heart is faint. And so the first poem ends with groaning, with a heart grown faint. My groans are many, and my heart is faint. 22 verses, one for each letter of the ancient alphabet, from the first letter to the last. A complete grief, a sorrow carried all the way through, from beginning to end, leaving nothing out. The poet gave the widow's tears a shape, letter by letter, so that nothing of the sorrow would be lost and nothing would be left unsaid. And when the last letter is reached, the poem does not resolve. It does not brighten. It ends where grief so often ends, in the quiet. My groans are many, and my heart is faint. Let that be enough for the first poem. We do not need to hurry away from it. We can let the widow's tears simply be for a moment in the stillness. The city that was full of people, sitting alone. The princess become a slave. The mother whose children have been carried away. Reaching out her hands and finding no one there to take them. Breathe now and let that image rest. We will go on in a little while, and the poem that comes next asks something even harder of us. The second poem, Chapter 2. If the first poem sat with the widow and her tears, the second turns its gaze upward, toward the one the widow kept calling out to. And what it sees is difficult. The poem does not flinch from it, neither will we. But we will read it slowly and gently, the way you would read anything hard to someone you love as they drift towards sleep. How the Lord has covered daughter Zion with the cloud of his anger. He has hurled down the splendor of Israel from heaven to earth. He has not remembered his footstool in the day of his anger. Here the tone darkens. The first poem wept. This poem wrestles. It looks at the ruin, and it says something the grieving heart is often afraid to say, that the catastrophe was more than the work of Babylon, that behind the enemy's sword there was something the poet cannot explain and cannot ignore, how the Lord has covered daughter Zion with the cloud of his anger. Without pity the Lord has swallowed up all the dwellings of Jacob. In his wrath he has torn down the strongholds of daughter Judah. He has brought her kingdom and its princes down to the ground in dishonor. Without pity. That is the phrase the poem cannot let go of. Without pity the Lord has swallowed up all the dwellings, the homes, the places where families slept and ate and lived their ordinary days. Swallowed up, torn down. In fierce anger he has cut off every horn of Israel. He has withdrawn his right hand at the approach of the enemy. He has burned in Jacob like a flaming fire that consumes everything around it. Like a flaming fire. We spoke in an earlier hour of the temple burning, of Solomon's temple going up in flames. Here is that fire seen through the eyes of the poet and understood as more than an army's torch, understood as the fire of judgment. Like an enemy he has strung his bow. His right hand is ready. Like a foe he has slain all who are pleasing to the eye. He has poured out his wrath like fire on the tent of daughter Zion. Like an enemy. Read those words slowly, because they are among the boldest in the whole book. The Lord is like an enemy. The very one the widow cried out to for comfort, the poet now dares to describe as the one who bent the bow against her. This is not easy theology. The poem does not make it easy. It simply holds the terrible thought up to the light and does not look away. The Lord is like an enemy. He has swallowed up Israel. He has swallowed up all her palaces and destroyed her strongholds. He has multiplied mourning and lamentation for daughter Judah. He has laid waste his dwelling like a garden. He has destroyed his place of meeting. The Lord has made Zion forget her appointed festivals and her Sabbaths. In his fierce anger he has spurned both king and priest. He has laid waste his dwelling like a garden, his own dwelling, the place he had chosen, the place set apart as holy. The poem insists on this, that what was destroyed was not just any city, but the very place God had called his own. And so the loss becomes stranger still and harder to understand. The Lord has rejected his altar and abandoned his sanctuary. He has given the walls of her palaces into the hands of the enemy. They have raised a shout in the house of the Lord as on the day of an appointed festival. Hear that bitter irony. They have raised a shout in the house of the Lord as on the day of a festival. Where once the pilgrims shouted for joy, the enemy now shouts in triumph. The same sound in the same place turned inside out. The shouting that once meant celebration now means conquest. The Lord determined to tear down the wall around daughter Zion. He stretched out a measuring line and did not withhold his hand from destroying. He made ramparts and walls lament. Together they wasted away. He made ramparts and walls lament. Even the stones grieve in this poem. The ramparts, the great defensive walls we spoke of, the ones the siege engines finally broke through, are made to mourn. They waste away together. Her gates have sunk into the ground. Their bars he has broken and destroyed. Her king and her princes are exiled among the nations. The law is no more, and her prophets no longer find visions from the Lord. The law is no more. The prophets no longer find visions. It is a silence in the poem now, deeper than the silence of the empty streets. The word of God has gone quiet. The guidance that once came has stopped coming, and the people are left to sit in the ruin with no clear voice to tell them what it means. The elders of daughter Zion sit on the ground in silence. They have sprinkled dust on their heads and put on sackcloth. The young women of Jerusalem have bowed their heads to the ground. And there, with the elders sitting on the ground in silence, dust on their heads, we will pause. The poem has led us into its darkest room, where the Lord is spoken of as an enemy, where the altar is spurned and the sanctuary abandoned, where the law falls silent and the prophets see no vision. It is a hard place. But even here, notice, the poet does not turn away from God. He turns toward God, even in the accusation. Even the boldest words are still spoken to the one who made the widow weep. There is a strange faith in that. To be angry at God is still to believe there is a God to be angry at. To cry out, "Is it nothing to you?" is still to believe that someone might hear. And the elders sit in silence on the ground and wait. We will sit with them a while. We will let the dust and the sackcloth and the bowed head simply be in the stillness of this quiet room. There is no hurry to move on. The morning this book promises is still far off, and we will reach it the honest way, through the whole of the night. For now, breathe, and let the weight of the second poem rest gently on the floor beside your bed. The elders are sitting in silence. You may sit with them, if you wish, in the quiet, for a little while longer. There is nothing you need to do. There is nothing you need to solve. There is only the old poem and the falling dust and the slow, patient dark, holding all of it without complaint, the way the night holds everyone who cannot yet sleep. Rest now. We will go on when you are ready, and not a moment before. The elders are still there, on the ground, and we return to them gently, the way you return to a room where someone is grieving and you do not want to startle them. Her prophets find no vision from the Lord. The elders of daughter Zion sit on the ground in silence. They have thrown dust on their heads and put on sackcloth. The young women of Jerusalem have bowed their heads to the ground. Let those images settle, one at a time, the way dust settles in a room after the door has closed. The elders first. These are the ones the city looked to. The old men who sat in the gate, who heard disputes, who remembered the way things used to be, who carried in their bodies the long memory of the people. They were the steadiness of the city. When something went wrong, you went to the elders, and they knew what to do because they had seen it before. But now they sit on the ground, not on their seats in the gate, on the ground, in the dust, with no counsel to give. The poem says they sit in silence. Silence is a heavy thing for elders. Their whole work was speech, was judgment, was the passing down of wisdom from one generation to the next. And now there is nothing to say. The words have run out. The wisdom has no map for this. They have thrown dust on their heads. This is what mourning looked like in that world, in that time. You did not keep your grief inside where no one could see it. You wore it. You put on the rough cloth called sackcloth, which scratched the skin and let you feel your sorrow against your body. You reached down into the dust of the earth and lifted it and let it fall over your own head, so that the ground you would one day return to was already upon you, marking you as one who mourns. These were not small gestures. They were the whole body saying what the heart could no longer hold. And so the elders, the leaders, the steadiest of the steady, sit in the dust with the dust upon them, saying nothing. The young women of Jerusalem have bowed their heads to the ground. Once these were the ones who danced at the festivals. Once they carried the tambourines. Once they sang the songs of harvest and of homecoming. The poem earlier spoke of the roads to Zion that mourned because no one came to the appointed feasts. Now the young women who would have led those feasts have bowed their heads to the very ground the elders sit upon. The generation that was meant to carry the joy forward has been bent down into silence beside the generation that was meant to carry the wisdom. And so the whole span of the people, the old and the young, the keepers of memory and the bearers of hope, are gathered here in the same posture, in the same dust, under the same silence. There is no one left standing to comfort the rest. The poem, you may remember, has been counting the ones who have no comforter. Here it shows you why. Everyone who might have comforted is themselves bowed to the ground. And then the poem does the thing that is hardest to sit with. It brings us the children. My eyes fail from weeping. I am in torment within. My heart is poured out on the ground because my people are destroyed, because children and infants faint in the streets of the city. My eyes fail from weeping. Here the voice of the poem breaks through again, the one who has been describing all of this from close by. The eyes that have watched the destruction can no longer see for the tears. I am in torment within, the poet says. My heart is poured out on the ground. Notice where the heart is poured out, on the ground. The same ground the elders sit upon, the same ground the young women have bowed their heads to. Everything in this poem is settling downward, toward the dust, toward the earth, as though grief has its own gravity and pulls all things low. And why? Because children and infants faint in the streets of the city. We spoke in an earlier night of the famine that came with the siege, of the long months, close to 2 years by some counts, when the food ran out inside the walls and there was nowhere to go and nothing to be had. Here the poem shows you what that famine looked like on a single street, on a single afternoon. They say to their mothers, "Where is bread and wine?" as they faint like the wounded in the streets of the city, as their lives ebb away in their mother's arms. Where is bread and wine? It is such a small question. It is the question of any child who is hungry and does not yet understand why the hunger will not stop. They do not ask about Babylon. They do not ask about the king or the walls or the sins of the nation. They ask their mothers a simple thing. Where is the bread? Where is the wine? The ordinary food of the table, the food that was always there before, and the mothers have no answer. There is no bread. There is no wine. And the children faint like the wounded in the streets, the poem says, as though hunger were a kind of injury, as though starvation were its own slow battle fought in the little bodies of the young. Their lives ebb away in their mother's arms. This is as tender and as terrible as the book will get. A mother holding a child whose life is going out of it, and there is nothing she can do, because there is no bread, because the city is broken, because the siege has done what sieges do. I will not linger longer than the poem itself does over this. The poem does not dwell to wound you. It shows you the truth of what happened, honestly, and then it moves. But I want you to know why it is here. It is here because grief that hides the worst thing is not honest grief. This book will not pretend that the fall of the city was only about walls and stones and temples. It was about children in the streets. It was about mothers with empty arms. And a book that means to walk with the sorrowing all the way to morning cannot skip over the deepest room of the night. It has to name it. And then, having named it, the poem turns outward. What can I say for you? With what can I compare you, daughter Jerusalem? To what can I liken you that I may comfort you, virgin daughter Zion? Your wound is as deep as the sea. Who can heal you? Hear what the poet is trying to do. He's trying to find a comparison. He's looking for something, anything, to set beside this grief so that it might be understood, so that it might be comforted. With what can I compare you? To what can I liken you, that I may comfort you? He wants to comfort her. He has been the one all along watching, weeping, describing. Now he turns to the ruined city herself and wants to say something that will help. And he cannot find the words. Your wound is as deep as the sea, he says. Who can heal you? There is no comparison large enough. The only thing as vast as this sorrow is the sea, and the sea cannot be measured or crossed or drained. So the poet, who wanted to comfort, ends up simply naming how uncomfortable the wound is, how deep, how past all healing that he can see. And then the poem turns, near its end, to the false comforters. The visions of your prophets were false and worthless. They did not expose your sin to ward off your captivity. The prophecies they gave you were false and misleading. There were prophets in the city before it fell. There were voices that said all would be well, that the walls would hold, that Babylon would go home, that no harm would come. And the poet says now, plainly, that those visions were false and worthless. They did not expose your sin, he says. They did not tell the people the hard truth that might have turned them. They told them what they wanted to hear, and so the comfort those prophets gave was a comfort that led to ruin. This is a hard thing the poem is saying, and it is worth sitting with quietly. Not every comfort is a true comfort. The words that say all is well when all is not well may feel gentle in the moment, but this poem prefers the harder, truer thing. It would rather name the wound as deep as the sea than pretend the wound is small. And so, near the very end of the second poem, it turns the sorrow outward, into a cry. All who pass your way clap their hands at you. They scoff and shake their heads at daughter Jerusalem. Is this the city that was called the perfection of beauty, the joy of the whole earth? The perfection of beauty, the joy of the whole earth. That is what she was once called, this city. And now the ones who pass by clap their hands and shake their heads and scoff. The same passing by we heard of in the first poem, is it nothing to you, all you who pass by? The travellers on the road, who see the ruin and hurry on, and some of them, the poem says, even mock. But the poem does not leave her among the mockers. It gives her at last something to do with her sorrow. Cry out from your heart to the Lord, it says. In effect, the command comes. Their heart cried out to the Lord. You walls of daughter Zion, let your tears flow like a river day and night. Give yourself no relief, your eyes no rest. Arise, cry out in the night, as the watches of the night begin. Pour out your heart like water in the presence of the Lord. Lift up your hands to him for the lives of your children, who faint from hunger at every street corner. Arise, cry out in the night. There it is. The pivot the whole poem has been moving toward, quietly, beneath the ruin. The sorrow that has been sitting in the dust in silence is now told to rise and cry out. Not to a passing traveller, not to a false prophet, to the Lord. At the beginning of the watches of the night in that world was divided into watches, the long hours through which a watchman kept guard, and each watch had its beginning, a moment when a new watchman took his place, and the old one stepped down. The poem says, "At the beginning of the watches, arise and cry out. In the dead of the night, when everyone else is asleep, when the darkness is thickest and the silence most complete, that is when the grieving heart is told to lift its voice. Pour out your heart like water in the presence of the Lord, not held back, not measured, poured out the way water is poured, all of it, until the vessel is empty. You who cannot sleep tonight, you who lie awake at the beginning of the watches with a heart too full to rest, this old poem is speaking directly into your hour. It does not tell you to stop grieving. It tells you where to pour the grief. Pour it out like water, in the presence of the one who is there in the dark with you. Lift up your hands to him, the poem says, for the lives of your children. The very children who fainted in the streets a few lines ago are now the reason to pray. The deepest wound becomes the deepest prayer, and so the second poem closes with its command to cry out in the night, its call to pour out the heart like water, its lifting of hands toward heaven in the darkest of the watches. The elders who sat in silence are, by the poem's own logic, being called to break the silence, not with counsel they do not have, but with a cry they can still make. And here, having sat in the dust with the second poem, having heard its hardest images and its turning of sorrow into prayer, we come to the centre of the whole book. The third poem, the long one, the one we spoke of on the first night, the one built 3 times through the Hebrew alphabet, 66 verses, 3 lines for every letter, so that even the shape of it insists on completeness, on going all the way through. This is the heart of Lamentations, and it begins with a single voice. Until now, the sorrow has mostly belonged to the city. Jerusalem the widow, Zion the daughter, bowed to the ground. The grief has been a whole people's grief, spoken through the figure of a mourning woman. But now the poem narrows. The many voices become one, and that one says, I am the man who has seen affliction by the rod of the Lord's wrath. I am the man who has seen affliction. Hear how it opens. Not the city has fallen, not the people mourn, but I am the man. Suddenly it is one person speaking in the first person from inside his own suffering, not describing a widow across the street, not watching children faint from a distance, speaking of what has happened to his own flesh, his own bones, his own soul. This is the person of everyone in this book whom you can most fully become in the dark. The city is a symbol, the widow is a figure, but the man who says, I am the man who has seen affliction, he is a single human being, awake in his own pain, and his I can become your eye as you listen. I am the man who has seen affliction by the rod of the Lord's wrath. He has driven me away and made me walk in darkness rather than light. Indeed, he has turned his hand against me again and again all day long. He has driven me away and made me walk in darkness rather than light. This is the walking of someone who has lost the way, driven out into the dark with no lamp, no path, no sense of where the ground will fall away. You know this walking, perhaps. The walking you do inside your own mind in the hours you cannot sleep, when the darkness is not only outside the window but somehow within, and there is no light to be found in any direction. Indeed, he has turned his hand against me again and again, all day long, again and again, all day long. There is no rest in it. The suffering does not come once and then release him. It comes and comes hour after hour, the whole day through, and then, we may imagine, the whole night after. He has made my skin and my flesh grow old and has broken my bones. He has made my skin and my flesh grow old. Grief ages the body. The one who has wept for a long time knows this. The face changes. The skin loosens. The bones themselves feel heavier, older, as though the sorrow had added years to the frame in a matter of weeks. He has besieged me and surrounded me with bitterness and hardship. There is that word again. Besieged. The man's own body has become a city under siege. Everything that was done to Jerusalem, the walls, the surrounding, the closing in, is now happening inside a single person. He is the besieged city now. He has made me dwell in darkness like those long dead. Like those long dead. Not the recently buried. The long dead. The ones whose graves are old, whose names are forgotten, who have been in the dark so long that the living no longer think of them at all. That is where the man says he dwells, in a darkness that old, that forgotten. He has walled me in so I cannot escape. He has weighed me down with chains, walled in, chained. The heavy bronze chain, the poem says elsewhere, that holds him so he cannot go forth. There is no door in this wall. There is no key to these chains. He has tried every direction and found the wall on every side. Even when I call out or cry for help, he shuts out my prayer. Hear that. Even his prayer is shut out. He does the thing the second poem told him to do. He cries out in the night. He calls for help. He pours out his heart. And the sense he has, in this deepest place, is that the cry does not get through. That heaven itself has closed its door. This is the loneliest line in the whole book. To grieve is hard. To grieve and feel your prayer bounce back from a shut heaven is harder still. And this poem, which will end in the greatest hope of all Scripture, is honest enough to pass through this room first, the room where even prayer seems useless. He has barred my way with blocks of stone. He has made my paths crooked. The path that should lead somewhere has been made crooked, twisted back on itself, so that every step forward is also, somehow, a step lost. You may know that feeling too. The nights when you try to think your way toward peace, and the thoughts only wind back into the same dark corners, the same worries, the same grief, no matter how you turn. The path made crooked, and now the poem gathers all of this into its lowest point. Like a bear lying in wait, like a lion in hiding, he dragged me from the path and mangled me and left me without help. He drew his bow and made me the target for his arrows. He pierced my heart with arrows from his quiver. I became the laughingstock of all my people. They mock me in song all day long. He has filled me with bitter herbs and given me gall to drink. He has filled me with bitter herbs and given me gall to drink. There it is, the wormwood and the gall, the bitter herbs of the deepest suffering. The wormwood, that plant so bitter its very name became a word for sorrow, and the gall, the bitterness that turns the stomach. In the old poems, the cup of wormwood was a picture of the cup of God's wrath, a cup you did not choose but were made to drink to the bottom, and the man says he has drunk it. Remember my affliction and my wandering, the wormwood and the gall. I well remember them, and my soul is downcast within me. My soul is downcast within me. Bowed down, sunk low. The same downward motion we have watched all night, the elders sinking to the ground, the heart poured out on the ground, and now the soul itself bowed down within the body. This is the bottom. This is the lowest point of the entire book. The man who has seen affliction, walled in, chained, his prayer shut out, his path made crooked, his mouth full of gall, his soul bowed down within him. There is nowhere further down to go. And here, at this exact place, at the very floor of the darkest night, the poem is about to do the most astonishing thing. Not because the man's circumstances have changed. Nothing outside him has changed at all. The city is still fallen. The chains are still heavy. The gall is still bitter on his tongue. But something in him is about to turn. At the very moment when his soul is bowed lowest within him, a single word is coming that will lift the whole book off the ground. We're not going to rush to it tonight. We have come the honest way, all through the falling dust and the bowed heads and the fainting children and the man in his chains, and we have arrived at the true bottom where the wormwood is. That is where we will rest, at the lowest point, in the deepest room, in the thickest dark. because the turn that is coming means the most when you have felt how far down the man had to fall before it came. So let your own soul, if it is bowed down within you tonight, simply be bowed down for a little while. You do not have to lift it yourself. You do not have to climb out of the pit by your own strength. The man in the poem did not. He sat in the bitterness and remembered it, and let his soul be downcast, and only then, only from the very bottom did the light begin to break. There is no shame in being at the bottom. The centermost voice of the whole book is there with you. I am the man who has seen affliction, he says, and perhaps tonight you can say it with him. You're not the first to lie awake in the dark with a soul bowed down. You're in old and honest company. And the morning this book has promised is real, and it is coming, and it begins from precisely this place, from the floor of the pit, from the taste of the gall, from the soul bowed low. But it will keep until you are ready. There is nothing to solve tonight. There is only the poem, and the dark, and the slow breathing in and out, and the quiet that holds you as gently as it holds the man who has seen affliction. Rest here a while, at the bottom, where the turn is nearest, even though we have not yet spoken it. We will speak it when the time comes, and not a moment before. For now, let the wormwood be named, and let it settle, and let the night keep its long, patient watch over you, the way it has kept watch over every grieving heart that ever lay awake at the beginning of the watches, waiting for a morning it could not yet see. And now, the turn. It comes so quietly you might almost miss it, the way the very first light of morning is not a sound at all, but only a slow paling of the dark before anyone has thought to open their eyes. The man who has seen affliction, whose soul is bowed down within him, who has tasted the wormwood and the gall, says one small word, yet. Yet this I call to mind, and therefore I have hope. Hear how the sentence bends. Everything before it has fallen downward, verse after verse, the whole weight of the book pressing toward the floor, and now, at the very bottom, a single word turns the head upward. Yet. Not my circumstances have changed. Not the walls are rebuilt, the chains are struck off, the gall wiped from the mouth. Nothing outside the man has moved. The city is still ash. The night is still long. But he does one thing that cost him everything, and it is this. He calls something to mind. He remembers. At the lowest point of the darkest night, with his soul bowed down within him, he chooses what to think about. He turns his memory away from the wormwood, just for a moment, and points it somewhere else. This I call to mind, and therefore I have hope. He is not pretending the pit is not real. He has spent 30 verses telling us exactly how real it is. He is simply choosing to hold one true thing beside all the other true things. And here is the thing he holds. Listen slowly. Let each line be its own breath. The steadfast love of the Lord never ceases. His mercies never come to an end. They are new every morning. Great is your faithfulness. This is the centre of the whole book. This is the place the whole night has been walking toward, all through the falling dust and the empty gates and the fainting children and the man in his chains. This is the room at the heart of the house, and it is worth holding these words up to the light one at a time, the way you would turn a small treasure in your hand, because there is more inside each one than a single hearing can carry. The steadfast love of the Lord. The word beneath that phrase in the Old Hebrew is a word that is very hard to carry across into our tongue. It means love, but not the love that comes and goes with the weather of feeling. It means loyalty, the love that has bound itself by promise and will not walk away. It means kindness and mercy and faithfulness, all folded together into one word, a love that keeps its covenant even when the one it loves has broken every clause. Steadfast love. Love that stands. Love that does not move when everything else has moved. And of this love the man says, it never ceases. Think of what he is saying and where he is saying it. He is sitting in the ruins of the temple where that love was supposed to dwell. He has watched the sanctuary abandoned, the festivals forgotten, the prophets left without a vision. By every appearance the love of the Lord has ceased. That is what the eyes report. That is what the fallen stones seem to say. And into that very appearance the man speaks the opposite. It never ceases. His mercies never come to an end. The word there is a word of tenderness, of a mother's compassion, of the ache that a parent feels in the very belly for a child who is hurting. Those mercies, the man says, never run dry. You cannot exhaust them. You cannot come to the last of them and find the barrel empty. However much has been drawn out, however deep the drought, there is always more. His mercies never come to an end. And then the line that has carried this book across 3,000 years, the line that gives this night its name, the promise that was named in the very first hour and deferred through all the dark until now. They are new every morning, not the same tired mercy, dragged over from yesterday, worn thin by use, new, fresh, made again in the night while you slept, laid out for you at the door of the dawn like bread that was baked while it was still dark. Every morning. Not some mornings. Not the mornings when you have earned it. Not the mornings after a good day. Every morning. The morning after the walls came down. The morning after the exile began. The morning in the pit. The morning you are afraid to wake into. That morning too has its mercy already waiting, already made new, already there before you open your eyes. This is why the book is read the way it is read. This is why we've taken the whole long night to come to this place. Because the promise does not float above the grief, untouched by it, spoken by someone who has never wept. The promise comes from the very floor of the pit. It is spoken by the man whose soul is bowed down within him, whose mouth still tastes of gall. He is not describing a mercy he has felt this morning. He is describing a mercy he trusts is coming from a place where he cannot yet see the light. He is remembering, against all the evidence of his own ruined city, that the God who made the morning has not stopped making it. And so he says the last line of the 4, and he says it not about himself, but to the one he is trusting. The line turns from speaking about God to speaking to God. Great is your faithfulness, your faithfulness. He lifts his bowed head just enough to speak directly to the one who could have ceased, and did not. Great is your faithfulness. It is a small sentence. It is one of the greatest sentences ever formed, because it is spoken not from the mountaintop, but from the ash heap, not by the comfortable, but by the man who has lost everything. And it declares from the bottom that the faithfulness of God is great, not adequate, not sufficient, great, larger than the ruin, larger than the siege, larger than the pit. Now let those words simply rest over you for a while. You do not have to feel them. You do not have to summon anything to meet them. They are true whether you feel them tonight or not, the way the mercies of the morning are already made whether or not you are awake to see them come. The steadfast love of the Lord never ceases. His mercies never come to an end. They are new every morning. Great is your faithfulness. Let them be a blessing laid gently across the dark of your room. You are not being asked to hold them up. They are holding you. And notice, if you have any wakefulness left, what the man does next, once he has spoken these words. He does not leap up cured. He does not announce that the sorrow is over. He turns the great truth into a single quiet resolve, and it is very small, and it is very strong. The Lord is my portion, says my soul, therefore I will hope in him. My portion. An old word from the days when the land was divided among the tribes, and each family was given its portion, its inheritance, the piece of ground that was theirs. But this man has lost his ground. His portion of earth is rubble. So he reaches for a portion that cannot be taken by any army. The Lord is my portion. If everything else is stripped away, If the field is burned and the house is ash and the treasure is bartered for bread, there is still one inheritance that no siege can carry off. The Lord is my portion, says my soul, therefore I will hope in him. And from that small resolve, the poem begins very gently to counsel, not to command, not to scold, to counsel the way one who has been in the pit and found the handhold turns and speaks softly to the one still down in the dark. The Lord is good, he says, to those who wait for him, to the soul who seeks him. The Lord is good. Hold that beside everything the night has said. The book has called him an enemy. It has said he acted without pity. It has not softened any of it. And now the same voice says, the Lord is good. Both are held. The grief is not erased by the goodness, and the goodness is not erased by the grief. They lie side by side in the same heart, the way they lie side by side in yours, the sorrow and the trust both real, both true, both present in the same dark room. The Lord is good to those who wait for him, to those who wait. That word will come again and again now, like a hand laid gently on the shoulder. Wait, to the soul who seeks him, not to the soul who has already found, who has all the answers, who has climbed out of the pit by clever effort, to the soul who seeks. The seeking itself is enough. The reaching in the dark, the turning of the face toward a light not yet risen, that is what he calls good. And then the line that is perhaps the truest counsel this whole book gives to a heart that lies awake at night. It is good that one should wait quietly for the salvation of the Lord. Wait quietly, not wait and demand, not wait and rage, not wait and rehearse every wound over and over until the sky lightens. Wait quietly. There is a rest being offered here that is deeper than sleep, and it is this. You do not have to fix the night. You do not have to solve your sorrow before morning. You do not have to argue your way to the dawn. It is good, the man says, simply to wait quietly for the salvation of the Lord, to let the waiting itself be the work, to let the quiet itself be the prayer. Feel how much weight lifts off you when you hear that. The whole burden of making the morning come is set down. You're not the one who brings the dawn. You never were. The mercies that are new every morning are made by hands that are not yours, in the dark, while you sleep. And all that is asked of you is to wait, and to wait quietly, and to trust that the one who has made every morning that ever was will not fail to make this one too. It is good, he says again, for a man to bear the yoke while he is young. Let him sit alone in silence, for the Lord has laid it on him. Sit alone in silence. There is no shame in the silence. We watch the elders fall into it, the silence of dust and sackcloth, and it seemed then like defeat. But the man in the pit takes that same silence and turns it gently into a posture of waiting. Let him sit alone in silence. Let him put his mouth in the dust, the man says. Perhaps there is hope. Perhaps. He does not overclaim. He does not promise more than he has been given. He says perhaps there is hope, and that perhaps spoken from the pit is worth more than 100 certainties spoken from a comfortable chair. And then he says the hardest thing, and we will not rush past it, because it belongs to the honesty this whole book has kept. Let him give his cheek to the one who strikes him, and be filled with insults. This is not a counsel of triumph. It is a counsel of surrender, of a strange and stubborn peace that stops fighting the sorrow and lets it be what it is. And it is followed at once by the reason, the ground beneath the whole hard-won stillness. For the Lord will not cast off forever, there, forever. The word that the grieving heart most needs and least believes, not forever. Though he cause grief, the man says, he will have compassion according to the abundance of his steadfast love. There is that word again, the steadfast love that never ceases, the covenant love that stands, according to its abundance, not according to its scarcity, not measured out in careful drops, according to its abundance, its overflow, its more than enough. For he does not willingly afflict or grieve the children of men. He does not do it willingly. The grief is real, and the book has never denied it, but it is not the thing God delights in, not the thing his heart leans toward. His heart leans toward the compassion, toward the mercy that is new every morning. The affliction is the strange and heavy work. The mercy is the native language. So the whole tone of the poem has turned without the man's world changing at all. He is still in the pit. But he has remembered the morning, and the memory has become a place to stand, and from that place he can counsel a soul as low as his own to wait, and to wait quietly, and to trust that the casting off is not forever, and that the one whose faithfulness is great will, in his own good time, be good. Let that be the shape of your own rest tonight. Not the pretending that nothing is wrong, the waiting, the quiet, the setting down of the burden of fixing it all before dawn. Wait quietly, the book says to you, for the salvation of the Lord. And now, having stood a while at the very heart of the book, in the room where the light first broke, the poems turn once more. We move from the third poem to the fourth, and as we cross that threshold, you will feel the temperature of the language change. The great burst of hope does not carry on shining at full height. It does not need to. It has been spoken. It is behind us now, like a lamp lit in a back room, whose glow reaches down the hall even after you've walked on. The fourth poem returns to the lament, but it is a different lament than the first two, quieter, more tempered. The voice is not tearing at itself now. It is remembering with a kind of aching stillness, the way you remember a beautiful thing after the worst of the weeping is done, when the grief has become less a storm and more a long, low ache in the chest. Listen to how it begins, how the gold has grown dim, how the pure gold is changed, how the gold has grown dim. Feel the weight of that first word, how, the same word that opened the whole book, the cry that gives the book its Hebrew name. How lonely sits the city it began. How the gold has grown dim, it begins again. It is the sound a person makes standing before a loss too large for a sentence, the breath that comes out shaped like a question that expects no answer. How? The gold has grown dim. The image is of something precious that has lost its shine, the bright surface gone dull and grey, the treasure that was once dazzling now clouded over. The holy stones lie scattered at the head of every street. The stones of the temple, the sacred and costly stones, tumbled and strewn at every corner where the roads met, kicked among the rubble like common gravel, holy things lying where anyone might walk over them without a thought. And then the poet makes plain what the gold and the stones have stood for all along. The precious sons of Zion, once worth their weight in fine gold, how they are now reckoned as earthen pots, the work of a potter's hands. The precious sons of Zion, the children of the city, the young men and women who are her glory, her future, her most treasured wealth, once worth their weight in fine gold. That is how they were seen. That is what they were. And now, the poet says, they are reckoned as earthen pots, clay jars, the cheapest, commonest thing in any household, made in an afternoon by a potter's hands, broken without grief, thrown out without a second look. That is what has happened to the treasure of Zion. The gold has been counted as clay. The most valuable were trampled as though they were the most disposable. Hold this beside the mercy you just heard, and feel how the two do not cancel. The mercy is new every morning, and the gold has grown dim. Both are true. The book will not let you have one without the other. It insists that you can hold the promise of the morning and still say, honestly in the same breath, how the gold has grown dim. The grief is not a failure of hope. The hope does not require you to stop grieving. They live together, and the fourth poem shows you how by returning to the lament with the memory of mercy still glowing behind it. And so the horrors return, but heard now through that memory, so that they are real and terrible and yet no longer bottomless. The poet remembers the famine, that slow, patient killer that we have walked past before in the night. The children beg for food and no one gives to them. Their tongues cling to the roofs of their mouths for thirst. Those who once feasted on delicacies lie desolate in the streets. Those who were brought up in fine clothing now cling to ash heaps. Once brought up in fine clothing, the little ones who are dressed in the softest things, the children of the great houses, now clinging to the piles of ash for whatever warmth is left in them. And the poet does a strange and startling thing. He compares the city's fate to Sodom, the city that in the old stories was destroyed in a single burning moment. The punishment of my people, he says, is greater than the punishment of Sodom, which was overthrown in a moment, and no hand was laid on it. Greater than Sodom, not because the sin was worse, because the ending was slower. Sodom, the story says, went in an instant, in one flash of fire, and it was over. But Jerusalem was not given that mercy of speed. Jerusalem died slowly over long months, through the wasting of hunger, through the ache of a siege that would not end. To be overthrown in a moment is a hard thing. To be undone slowly, day after day, watching the strength drain out little by little, is in its way a heavier grief, and the poet names it as such. Her princes were purer than snow, he remembers, whiter than milk. Their bodies were more ruddy than coral, their beauty like sapphire. He's painting the young nobles as they once were, radiant with health, bright and strong, the pride of the city, purer than snow. And then, the fall. Now their face is blacker than soot, he says. They are not recognized in the streets. Their skin has shriveled on their bones. It has become as dry as wood. The famine has done its work on the fairest of them, and those who were once so beautiful that strangers stopped to look are now so wasted that their own neighbours pass them without knowing their faces. Their skin cleaves to their bones, withered and dry as a stick, and the poet, remembering, says the thing that even the earlier poems could barely bring themselves to say, the mark by which everyone knew the hunger had reached its very worst. Happier were the victims of the sword, he says, than the victims of hunger. It was better, he means, to die quickly by the blade than to die slowly by the empty stomach. When even the most tender-hearted mothers, the pitiful women, were driven to the unthinkable by the famine, then it was plain that the hunger had done all the harm that hunger could do. He names it, and he does not linger on it, and we will not linger on it either, because the point is not the horror for its own sake. The point is how far the gold had fallen, how completely the precious had been reduced to the common, how thoroughly the beautiful had been ruined, and the poet knows why. He does not leave it as a mystery or a cruelty without cause. It was for the sins of her prophets, he says, and the iniquities of her priests who shed in her midst the blood of the righteous. The ones who should have guarded the city, the shepherds who should have kept the flock, the false prophets we met earlier in the night whose visions were empty, the priests who should have stood between the people and the ruin. They are named. The grief has a cause, and the cause is not hidden, and there is a strange comfort even in that the ruin was not random, not meaningless, not the whim of an indifferent sky. And then, near the close of the fourth poem, comes a line that leans, ever so slightly, back toward the light we heard at the centre. The punishment of your iniquity, O daughter of Zion, is accomplished, finished. Not the full punishment that was deserved, the poet is careful to say, but the measure that God had designed and determined, and no more. There is a limit. There is a bottom to the falling, and the daughter of Zion has reached it. He will keep you in exile no longer, the line goes on, than that measure requires. The affliction has an end that was set from the beginning. The night is long, but it is not endless. The morning we heard promised at the centre is real, and even here, in the tempered grief of the fourth poem, the poet can say that the punishment is accomplished, that the worst is behind, that the measure is filled. So the lament returns, yes, but it is no longer bottomless. It has a floor now, because we have stood on that floor and heard, from it, that the mercies are new every morning, and it has a ceiling now, because we have been told that the punishment is accomplished, that it will not go on forever. The grief is held between those two, the mercy beneath it and the ending above it, and held that way, it can be borne. Let your own grief be held that way tonight. Beneath it, the steadfast love that never ceases. Above it, the promise that it will not last forever. And in between, only the waiting, the quiet waiting for a morning whose mercies are already made, already laid out at the door, already there before you wake. Rest now in that in-between place. You do not have to reach the morning tonight. You only have to wait for it, quietly, the way the whole book has learned to wait, with the gold grown dim in one hand and the great faithfulness held close in the other, and the long patient dark keeping its watch over you until the light it has promised finally, gently, begins to come. And so we come to the last of the 5 poems. 4 songs of grief lie behind us now, 4 long turnings of the alphabet, 4 ways of saying what could not be said. And in each of them, whatever the voice, whatever the grief, one thing has held true. There has been no answer. The city has cried out, the widow has wept, the man who saw affliction has spoken his yet, and named the mercies and waited. But God has not spoken back. Not once in all these pages has the Lord replied. There is no voice from the whirlwind here, no word from the cloud, no answering promise laid alongside the grief to lift it. There is only the crying and the waiting and the trust held out in the dark toward a silence that does not break. That is a hard thing to say aloud, and we will not soften it. Lamentations captures only the suffering and the longing that the people carried before God showed his mercy. It stays inside the sorrow. It does not rush past it to the rescue. And so this final poem, the 5th, comes to us not as an answer but as one more asking. But the asking has changed. Listen to how it changes. Through 4 poems, the voice has been mostly a single voice. The city, alone. The widow weeping in the night with no one to comfort her. The man who has seen affliction, walled in by himself, chained by himself, fed wormwood and gall in the solitude of his own suffering. One. Always, until now, that lonely I. But the 5th poem does not begin with I. It begins with we. Remember, O Lord, what has befallen us. Look and see our disgrace. Us, our. Hear how the loneliness has opened. The one who wept alone is no longer alone. The whole surviving people have gathered their voices into one voice, and they turn together toward the God who has not answered, and they pray. Remember. That is the first word of the last poem, and it is a small word to carry so much weight. Remember. It does not demand. It does not accuse. It does not even ask for rescue. Not yet. It only asks to be seen, to be held in the mind of God. Look and see our disgrace. As though the hardest part of all the suffering has been the fear of being forgotten. The fear that the ruin was not only terrible but unwitnessed. That the tears fell into a sky that did not notice. And so the whole people, standing in the ash of everything they had, lift their heads and ask the only thing that grief most deeply wants. Do not forget us. See what has happened to us. Keep us in your memory. And notice tonight that the form of the poem has changed too. For 4 poems the acrostic has held, 22 verses, 1 for each letter of the Hebrew alphabet, from the first letter to the last. The completeness of grief spelled out in full. And in the 3rd poem, that great central poem, the acrostic tripled itself, 66 verses, 3 lines for every letter, grief pressed down and running over. But the 5th poem lets the acrostic go. It no longer marches through the alphabet letter by letter. The strict form relaxes, and yet it keeps 22 lines. 22. The same number as the letters, even without spelling them out. as if the poem has learned the shape by heart and no longer needs to trace each letter to keep the form, as if grief, having gone through the whole alphabet 4 times over, now knows its own length without being told. There is something gentle in that loosening. The tight structure of the earlier poems, the careful ordering of sorrow, gives way at the end to something freer, something more like a plain prayer. The people are past the need to arrange their grief so precisely. They only want to speak now. They only want to be heard. And so they begin the inventory of what has been lost, not to wallow in it, to lay it out before God, item by item, so that nothing is hidden, so that the full weight is seen. Our inheritance has been turned over to strangers, they pray, our homes to foreigners. The land that was promised, the land that was given, the land that was theirs through the fathers and the fathers of the fathers, passed now into other hands. The house you were born in, lived in by someone who does not know your name, the field your grandfather cleared, worked now by a stranger who never knew him. The inheritance gone over to those who did not receive it. We have become fatherless, they say, orphans. Our mothers are widows. The whole people speaking as children who have lost the ones who kept them. We must buy the water we drink, they say. Our wood comes only at a price, even the water, even the wood. The most ordinary things, the things that should simply belong to a person living on their own land, must now be paid for, purchased from those who hold what was once freely theirs. We are pursued and worn out, they pray. We find no rest. We submitted to Egypt and Assyria to get enough bread. The old enemies, the old empires, the ones their fathers had learned to fear, now they must go to them, hands out, for a loaf. Our ancestors sinned and are no more, they say, and we bear their punishment. There is a hard honesty in that line. They do not pretend the fathers were blameless. They do not pretend they themselves are blameless either. The sin was real, back through the generations, and the weight of it has come down on those who are living now. Slaves rule over us, they pray, and there is no one to free us from their hands. We get our bread at the risk of our lives, they say. Because of the sword in the desert, our skin is hot as an oven, feverish from hunger. The famine still, even now. The hunger that ran through all the poems, running still through the last. And then the loss turns to the deepest wounds, the ones that reach past bread and water into the fabric of what a people is. They violated the women in Zion, the people pray, the virgins in the towns of Judah. Princes have been hung up by their hands, they say. Elders are shown no respect. The princes, the sons of the nobility, treated worse than servants. The elders, the ones whose grey heads had always meant honour, whose word at the city gate had always carried weight, given no respect at all. Young men toil at the millstones, they pray. The heavy grinding stone that turned the grain, work fit for beasts, work fit for the lowest slave, and now the young men bend to it. Boys stagger under loads of wood, they say. The children, the ones who should have been running in the streets, bent now under burdens too heavy for them. The elders are gone from the city gate, the people pray. The gate, where the old men used to sit and judge and talk and settle the affairs of the town, empty now. The young men have stopped their music. Hear that one especially tonight. The young men have stopped their music. There was music once. There were songs. There were the sounds young people make when the world seems open before them, and it has all fallen silent. Joy is gone from our hearts, the people pray. Our dancing has turned to mourning. The dancing turned to mourning. The feet that once moved in celebration now move only in the slow steps of grief. The same bodies, the same streets, but the joy drained out of them, and mourning poured in where the joy had been. And then the line that gathers all the losses into a single image. The crown has fallen from our head. The crown. Everything the city had been, everything that made her the princess among the provinces, the perfection of beauty, the joy of the whole earth, all of it summed up in a crown. And the crown has fallen, not been set aside for a while. Fallen, down from the head, into the dust, into the ash with everything else. Woe to us, the people pray, for we have sinned. There it is again, the honest word, the same word the widow spoke in the first poem, the same acknowledgement that has run beneath the whole book. We have sinned. The crown did not fall by accident. It fell because of what was done, and the people do not hide from that even now, even at the end, even in their deepest weariness. Because of this our hearts are faint, they pray. Because of these things our eyes grow dim. Faint hearts, dim eyes, the same faintness the first poem ended with, my heart is faint, come round again at the last. The same dimness as the gold grown dim in the fourth poem, now in the very eyes of the people, for Mount Zion, which lies desolate, they say, with jackals prowling over it. Picture it, the holy mountain, the place where the temple stood, the house of Solomon, the dwelling place they thought God would never leave, desolate now, empty, and the jackals, the wild dogs of the ruins, the animals that come only to places abandoned by people, picking their way over the fallen stones of the most sacred ground in the world. Where the priests once walked in their robes, the jackals prowl. Where the incense once rose, the wind moves through broken walls. It is the lowest picture in the poem, the holiest place turned over to the beasts. And it is exactly here, at this lowest place, that the prayer does something we have learned to watch for. It turns, not away from the ruin. The ruin is still there, the jackals still prowling. But the eyes of the people lift, past the desolate mountain, past the fallen crown, past all of it, up to the one thing that has not fallen. You, O Lord, reign forever, they pray. Your throne endures from generation to generation. Hear what they are saying. The earthly throne is gone. Zedekiah blinded and led away in chains, the last king of the line of David, no crown left on any head in Judah. The temple thrown down, the city broken open. Everything that could fall has fallen, but one throne has not fallen. You, O Lord, reign forever. Your throne endures from generation to generation. The people who have lost every earthly thing lift their eyes to the one thing that cannot be lost. The reign of God, above the ruin, untouched by the fire, standing when everything else has been thrown down. It is the same lift we heard at the centre of the third poem, the same turning from the wreckage to the one who is not wrecked. Great is your faithfulness, the man had said there. You reign forever, the people say here. Two ways of laying hold in the dark of the one thing that holds. And then, having found that ground, having planted their feet on the one throne that endures, the people ask the question their whole grief has been building toward. Why do you always forget us, they pray? Why do you forsake us so long? Not a rebellion, not a turning away. A child's question, asked of a father who is trusted even in the silence. Why so long? Why the forgetting? And then at last the plea that the whole book has been reaching for. Restore us to yourself, O Lord, that we may be restored. Renew our days as of old. Say those words slowly tonight, and let them rest. Restore us to yourself, O Lord, that we may be restored. Notice what they ask for. Not first for the city to be rebuilt, not first for the walls to rise again, or the fields to be returned, or the exiles to come home. Restore us to yourself, to yourself. The deepest loss underneath all the other losses was not the land or the temple or the crown, it was the nearness of God. And so the deepest asking is not for any of those things to come back, but for the nearness itself. Bring us back to you, and then we will be brought back. Turn us toward you, and then we will be turned. The restoration they want most is not of what they had, but of who they belong to. Renew our days as of old, they pray. Make it as it once was, before the fire, before the siege, before the falling. Back to the days when the crown was on the head, and the music played, and the dancing had not yet turned to mourning, and the God who reigns forever seemed near enough to touch. Renew our days as of old. And here, at the very end, the book does something almost unbearable in its honesty. It does not resolve. There is no answer. Remember, the whole book stays inside the suffering, inside the longing, before God has shown his mercy. And the last line is not a promise received. It is a fear held open. Unless you have utterly rejected us, the people pray, and are angry with us beyond measure. That is how Lamentations ends, not with the morning arrived, not with the mercies laid out and gathered up, but with a prayer left hanging. Restore us, they ask, renew our days, unless you have utterly rejected us. The book will not tie the bow. It leaves the plea suspended in the air, hanging on a trust that has not yet been rewarded, reaching toward a God who has not yet replied. And there is something in that unfinished ending that is truer to grief than any neat resolution could ever be, because grief does not resolve on a schedule, because the morning does not always come the moment we ask for it, because there are prayers we pray that hang in the air of our own rooms, unanswered for longer than we ever thought we could bear. And Lamentations, this most honest of books, will not pretend otherwise. It ends the way real waiting ends, which is to say, it does not end. It stays open. It stays asking. It leaves the door of the prayer standing open, and it trusts that the one who reigns forever will, in his time, come through it. And so, if your own grief is unresolved tonight, if your own prayer has been hanging in the air for longer than you can say, unanswered, suspended, reaching toward a silence that has not yet broken, then hear this. You are in good company. The whole surviving people of Jerusalem ended their book exactly there. Restore us, unless you have forgotten us. Renew us, unless you are angry beyond measure. They did not know the answer when they prayed it. They only trusted the one they prayed it to. And you may lay your own unfinished asking right here, into the same open ending, into the same suspended trust. You do not have to resolve it tonight. You do not have to know how it turns out. You only have to hand it the way they handed theirs, to the God who reigns forever, whose throne endures from generation to generation, and then let it go, and rest. That is the book. 5 poems. The lonely city, the day of anger, the man who saw affliction, the gold grown dim, and the whole people praying, restore us to yourself. We have walked the length of it tonight, slowly, from the first line to the last, through all the grief the alphabet could hold 4 times over, and out the far side into a prayer left open toward the morning. And now let me speak to you plainly, in my own voice, as the night comes to its close. You came here tonight carrying something. I do not know what it is. A grief with a name, perhaps, or one without. A loss that is fresh, or one you have carried so long it has become part of how you stand. Something that made a book about a fallen city feel less like history and more like a mirror. Whatever it was, you brought it here, and you let it sit beside you while an old honest voice named its own sorrow in the dark. And that is the thing about this book that I most want you to carry into sleep. It did not tell you to feel better. It did not tell you your grief was small, or that it would pass by morning, or that you were wrong to feel the weight of it. It sat down in the ash beside you and it wept, and it let you weep, and it did not once tell you to stop. It only did one thing. At its very centre, in the 3rd poem, at the lowest point of the lowest night, it lifted its head and said a word. Yet this I call to mind. The steadfast love of the Lord never ceases. His mercies never come to an end. They are new every morning. Great is your faithfulness. Nothing had changed when that word was spoken. The city was still ruined. The gold was still dim, the crown had still fallen, and in the middle of all of it the voice said, "Yet," and named the mercies that are made new with every dawn. That is the whole gift of this book, not that the ruin was undone, but that even in the ruin the mercies were being made new, quietly, faithfully, without being seen, without being felt, laid out at the door before anyone woke to find them. And they are being made new tonight. Right now, while you lie here in the dark with your own grief held in your hands, the morning's mercies are already being prepared for you. You do not have to make them. You do not have to earn them, or reach them, or even believe hard enough to deserve them. They are new every morning because that is simply what they are. That is what they do. They come with the light, whether or not you are awake to see it arrive. And so, let me tell you the last true thing, and then let you go. The morning will come, not because you stayed awake for it, not because you prayed the right prayer, or grieved the right way, or held it together, or fell apart. The morning will come because the one who reigns forever set it in motion long ago, and it has never once failed to arrive. The dawn does not wait for our permission. It does not need our watching. It comes over the eastern edge of the world in its own quiet time, grey at first, then gold, spilling into rooms where people sleep and do not know it is coming, laying its light across faces that are finally at last at rest, and with it come the mercies, new, every one of them new, made this morning, for you. So you can sleep now. You truly can. Your sorrow has been carried tonight. It has been witnessed. An old voice from an old ruin sat with it and named it and did not turn away, and now you can set it down. Not solve it, not finish it. Just set it down, here, in the open ending, where the whole people of Jerusalem set theirs, and leave it in the keeping of the one whose throne endures from generation to generation. The night has been long, but it is not endless. It has a flaw, and we stood on it, and heard the mercies named, and it has a ceiling, and we touched it, and heard that the punishment is accomplished, that the worst has an end. Between those two, there is only the waiting, and you do not have to do the waiting awake. You can do it sleeping. You can do it dreaming. You can do it in the deep, quiet rest of someone who has laid their burden down, and trusted the morning to do what mornings do. The steadfast love that never ceases is beneath you now, holding you up. The promise that it will not last forever is above you, keeping watch. And the long patient dark is all around you, gentle now, no longer an enemy, only the space the light has to cross to reach you. Close your eyes, if they are not already closed. Let your breathing slow. Let the last of the day's weight loosen from your shoulders and sink away into the quiet. You are held, you are seen, you are not forgotten. And whether or not you are awake to greet it, the morning is already on its way, and its mercies are already made, already new, already laid softly at your door. Rest now, sleep, and let the great faithfulness keep its watch over you until the light it has promised finally, gently, begins to come.